Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and today is our inaugural episode celebrating the Hughes Hubbard and Reed FCPA and Anti-Bribery in Fall 2024 alert. In this episode, I'm joined by Mike DeBernardis, well known to our audience from his work on all things investigations and the corruption files. So, welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for putting this together. Happy to be here.
So this is the couple of different things I have to start with, Mike. First of all, Hughes Hubbard and Reed is the first major firm each year to release a FCPA and anti-bribery alert. You guys bring it out in December of each year. So you really lead the discussion in many ways, although other firms, of course, do a similar exercise. Two is you always introduce the whatever year's volume it is with a message from sort of current culture, whether that be a movie, whether that be a song, whether it be something else. And once again, you've done that this year with a quote from The Matrix. So maybe you could start with the quote and why you think it's particularly appropriate for the 2024 edition.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And we always, it's a serious stuff, but we always try to have a little bit of fun with it and keep it a little bit different for the readers and frankly for our team putting it together to keep it lively. But this year we started with a quote from The Matrix. The theme overall that we took for this alert was 1999 movies, which is an underrated movie year overall. I think if you look it up, you'll be surprised at how many excellent films came out that year. And we started with a quote from The Matrix, which was one of the largest movies and sort of groundbreaking movies of that year. And the quote is, "There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path." It's a quote from Morpheus to, which is a character played by Lawrence Fishburne, to Neo, the main character, of course, played by Keanu Reeves. And, I think as we were identifying sort of appropriate themes for this year's alert, this one stood out to the team in particular, mainly because there's no surprises anymore in terms of what's expected. There's no surprises anymore in terms of the FCPA, right? I think we're 20 years into sort of, or what I would consider to be the modern era of FCPA enforcement, this aggressive era of FCPA enforcement. You have FCPA conferences and you have policy and guidance statements from the Department of Justice and the SEC all the time. I think we really should be to the point now where most companies know the path, right? The basic blueprint of complying with the FCPA is well established, I think. But there's a difference between staying on the path, walking the path. And what we believe is that, in addition to a commitment from the company and resources and planning and vigilance and all of those things, there's also a need to stay up to date on the most recent developments. And our hope is that this resource, among the others that we publish, can help companies stay up to date and continue to walk the path.
There are four general categories or areas under this year's alert. Could you at least maybe describe for those and a little bit of a teaser in each section before maybe we take a look at some of the highlights from Mike's perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So chapter one is we broke it into 4 chapters. This is, I'll just say it every year, this is not a sit down and read type resource. It's 122 pages. We have made a really big effort the last 2 years just to cut it down. I think at one point we were up over 200 pages. This is meant to be a resource. It's a desktop resource that you can come to throughout the course of the year. It's not meant for cover to cover reading. It's split up into 4 chapters. The first chapter is our analysis. So we've got trends, lessons, highlights, all of those types of things from all the developments that we talk about throughout the alert. Chapter 2 is focused on the FCPA, both starting with policy developments and how those policies shaped the year. Then we jump into corporate resolutions. And we usually cover 2 years worth of corporate resolutions, just because I think in terms of building out the trends and lessons, it's important to take a 2-year look. I think you can build some false assumptions based on 1 year's of data. And we talk about individual prosecutions as well in there. Chapter 3 is always our sort of international chapter. So we select countries to spotlight. This year, those countries are the UK, France, and Brazil. And then chapter 4 is dedicated to updates on the work that the multilateral development banks do, the World Bank, et cetera, in sanctioning companies, investigating companies for corruption.
Like, can I ask on chapter 4 on the multilateral development banks, why
Yep.
is it important to bring this information forward, and how maybe can the anti-corruption compliance specialist in a U.S. corporation use that information that's in that chapter? Or what does it bring to someone like that?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting from a couple of perspectives. One, for companies that are operating in the developing world, especially companies operating on projects that are involving funding from the multilateral development banks, you're within the jurisdiction. So it's as interesting as and important as it is to pay attention to what the DOJ or the SEC is doing. For some companies, frankly, it's more important. Those that are perhaps outside of the jurisdiction of the US, but operating on projects funded by the World Bank, you're subject to the jurisdiction of the World Bank, subject to pretty significant sanctions. So staying up to date on those points is important. Even if you don't operate in that environment, I still think some of the lessons from the multilateral development bank cases are really that they have broader application, right? So some of the same lessons we're learning from FCPA cases in terms of risks involving third parties, in terms of gifts and entertainment, those some of the same lessons can be learned from the mistakes of others in the MDB context.
Mike, could I maybe spend a few minutes visiting with you on some of the top few highlights from either your perspective, the alerts perspective, or what you find the most interesting that you guys reported on from 2024?
Yeah, I think for me, I had a lot of fun with talking about and debating, frankly, with my colleagues on the trends this year because, I think it's getting a little harder to identify trends in some ways. Where again, like I said, we're 20 years in now. And so it's whereas things seem to pop off as new or really super interesting, it's really getting harder to do. And in some ways, for us, more fun to try to identify trends. You really have to take a deeper dive, I think, than previously to identify some of the trends. Also, most fun for us this year because we tried as best we could to make a parallel between each trend and a movie from 1999. You'll find that some of those parallels are really pretty clever and some are a massive stretch, but maybe just a couple that I went looking at this year and really the last 2 years, as I said, we try to go 2 years back for these. It stood out to me. One of them was we talked about a trend involving treatment of past misconduct, right? We talked about how companies are now routinely haunted by past misconduct and made a parallel to The House on the Haunted Hill in 1999 movie. Frankly, was not one of the best movies in 1999, but the parallel worked, so we went with it. But, I think really in 2022, 2023, there was a lot of hand-wringing about how the DOJ was going to implement their new policy, a new focus on punishing recidivists and how they were broadening the definition of past misconduct and how that was going to affect resolutions. And it's taken us a couple of years, but I really think we've landed on one, how the DOJ is going about doing it. And two, we're starting now after having a few examples of seeing how different types of misconduct are being handled. And, as you and I have discussed, and I really think was actually confirmed at the ACI conference this week, it looks like what they're doing is giving the proper credit for cooperation and remediation as a reduction off of the otherwise applicable guidelines range. But rather than starting from the bottom of the guidelines range, depending on what the level of misconduct was, how directly relevant it was to the current conduct, how far back it was, they're starting at a percentile within that range. So we had cases in 2023 and 2024 with the discount starting from the 5th percentile or the 10th percentile, even the 30th percentile, depending on misconduct. So it's been really interesting to see play out and also give companies an idea of how past misconduct might be treated. Go ahead.
No, I was saying, go ahead.
One other thing that sort of stood out to us and is not going to come as a surprise to anyone is this focus on encouraging whistleblowing. We've had this SEC whistleblower system for a long time. Has had a lot of success. The DOJ is increasingly trying to find ways to get companies to come forward and decided that they would make a big effort to as they call it, close the gap in those whistleblower programs of the SEC and other agencies. And so where we made the parallel to The Insider, a Russell Crowe film from 1999, involving a whistleblower. And really, this focus, I think, is just beginning on encouraging individuals to come forward. And to me, the real focus there is putting additional pressure on companies themselves to come forward and to come forward quickly with to self-report misconduct. Otherwise, the risk is that individuals are more incentivized to do it themselves.
Like, I would have to say that point, even more than the first one you raised, is it seems to me to be something that you could have a serious conversation with your clients or potential clients about, and the need to accurately, quickly, and efficiently get the information to the decision makers, but then make an accurate assessment. Would that be a fair sort of overall viewpoint?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, like it or not, part of the discussion of self-reporting that goes into that discussion and that analysis is, if we don't report, how likely are they to find out? And, I think some of these CEOs, chairmen of the board and such can be known as risk takers, but they want all the data. And so if something like this whistleblower program makes it more likely that the DOJ is going to find out whether you report or not, it can change the calculus. So this is absolutely relevant to those discussions, and this and other, other policy changes as well are relevant to those discussions. The DOJ has been, I think they recognize this is part of the discussion and have been trying to add factors that weigh toward.
Mike, we've got just a little bit of time left, but I wanted to end by asking you about the trends on gifts and hospitalities. You started off this podcast by giving us the quote that forms this year's alert. I was going to say everything old is new again, or everything new is old again. I'm not quite sure. We've both been doing this a long time. We've both seen gifts and hospitality be part of enforcement actions 20 plus years ago. And here we are in 2024 talking about gifts and hospitality. It struck me that we have to keep talking about the basics because people seem to be getting tripped up continually on the basics. And I wanted to maybe end this podcast by getting your thoughts on that issue.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's funny. We've had some sort of gifts and hospitalities, whether it's a trend, a highlight, a lesson in this alert for the last 16 years. It is always coming up. Sometimes it takes a different focus. The last couple of years, it's really been similar. I've been surprised. I think we had a couple of years stretch there where it didn't show itself as much in the resolutions, but it's been prominently, gifts and hospitality has been a prominent aspect of several corporate resolutions recently. It is surprising. I mean, talk about knowing the path with gifts and hospitalities. I think that is really well trodden. And, I guess the one thing I would say is, I was speaking on a panel about this topic just yesterday. I know for in-house compliance folks, this is a topic that comes up over and over and over again. They spend an inordinate amount of their time on dealing with requests for hospitality, requests for gifts, either giving or receiving. What we see in the resolutions are the egregious examples. If you can prevent the egregious examples, you will go a long way to preventing this from becoming an issue. I might be mistaken, but I'm not aware of any FCPA case that was built on a couple of nice dinners to a government official. We're talking about trips for an official and his family to Hawaii. We're talking about factory visits that actually involve no factory visit. Instead, it's luxurious travel and spending. I think, to me, ending this run of gifts and hospitalities as a trend here will just require companies to crack down on those really sort of extravagant outliers, and we'll be in a place where maybe it disappears. I'm not holding my breath, Tom. I think that it's just in these cases, the companies wanted to corruptly incentivize the officials, and they used gifts and hospitalities instead of cash in this case.
Mike, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to get a copy of the report, read it, get more information about the firm, what would be the best place for them to go?
Yeah, go on our website, hugheshubbard.com. You'll find it. The alert is prominent on there. You can download the electronic copy. I do encourage people to sign up for the printed version, the hard copy. We have it professionally done, nicely bound, and it can serve as a nice desktop resource.
Well, Mike, thanks again. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom.